There are serious questions about the two shipwrecked survivors of what was that first attack and whether, once they were survivors, right, that's the term of art in law and combat. We've all heard about having survivors of war and having detainees. If you think back and you're not a legal expert, why do we have so many discussions about detainees, even in the greatest wars, the World War II or the so-called War on Terror, where we were told these terrorists were terrible, and they were, but if they were caught alive, we followed the rules, the Geneva Conventions. You can think of examples where we didn't, and those were multi-year scandals. But in general, we have detainees, we have survivors of war, enemy combatants, and the rest, because we don't execute everyone. I say that as the baseline to remind you why this is such a big deal. The September 2nd attack involved on video the apparent killing or execution of those shipwreck survivors. Now we're getting more reporting about the video evidence. The New York Times, this came late today, says a new detail about the survivors of a U.S. military strike on a boat in the Caribbean further complicates the military's explanations for launching that, quote, follow-up attack that killed them. That is, of course, the strike that is sometimes proverbially referred to this week as the second strike. Quote, multiple people who've seen video of the attacks say the survivors climbed on the overturned hull and waved to something overhead, a gesture interpreted as an attempt to surrender, beckoning rescue, or trying to signal other alleged drug traffickers. You can see there the debate about what the signal meant and whether they were a threat or not. Now, the Times reports some who viewed the video said the most logical explanation was that the two survivors had seen the American aircraft above them and started signaling for a rescue. It's not clear from the video what the survivors had definitely seen the American aircraft, whether or not they had. All of this adding to the accounts from lawmakers who, of course, are putting on this bipartisan pressure, which is why so quickly some information, video, and testimony has come out. They were able to view.
Tonight, as I sat down to put this story together, I found myself thinking about how strange it is that some of the biggest political scandals in America always start with a moment that feels small, almost routine, and then suddenly you realize the entire government is wobbling on its axis. And that's what this week has felt like. A slow, uneasy unraveling, a creeping recognition that something catastrophic didn't just happen. It was recorded, debated, classified, botched, and then buried until the cracks finally split open. And now we're all staring at the same ugly truth together, trying to piece it back into something honest. That's where I want to take you tonight. Because what's emerging isn't just another Washington mess. It's a moral failure, a legal crisis, and potentially a defining moment for the Trump administration's relationship with the military, the law, and the truth. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. When I tell you this situation started with a tragedy, I'm not being dramatic. I'm describing exactly how the government now finds itself in the middle of a scandal that stretches from the Pentagon all the way to the Oval Office. The country watched the first video months ago, a drone strike that the administration insisted targeted drug traffickers. But there was no independent verification, no public evidence other than the footage they chose to show. They wanted us to accept it as fact, to treat it as a straightforward success story. But nothing about it was straightforward, and now the story has mutated into something darker, a full-scale political and moral disaster. Here's the core. Evidence is piling up, and with it, the pressure. You can practically see the storm forming around Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. What began as whispers about unusual military conduct has spiraled into serious questions about oversight, legality, and whether the Trump administration has crossed a line that cannot be spun or explained away. Washington knows something is wrong. Lawmakers know it, journalists know it, and the Pentagon, or at least the parts of it trying to distance themselves, certainly knows it. What's actually remarkable is that despite the Trump era's non-stop attacks on accountability, the old structures of oversight are still managing to push back, slowly, messily, but undeniably. Transparency isn't dead, even though some days this administration tries to strangle it. What we're seeing is an oversight system trying to function while the executive branch resists its very existence. And that tension, that push and pull, is why all of this is finally coming to light. Let me put this plainly. We are dealing with evidence that strongly suggests the United States may have carried out an unlawful killing, a war crime, under the direction of Donald Trump's Pentagon. And I don't use that word lightly, war crime. But when veterans, military lawyers, and legal scholars all start sounding the alarm after watching video evidence, you pay attention. That alone should shake the country. But it gets worse. The survivors, the shipwrecked men from the first strike, that's where things go from bad to chilling. Because these men, according to multiple people who viewed the unreleased footage of the second strike, were not combatants in any real sense at the moment of their deaths. They were not armed. They were not fighting. They were not maneuvering a vessel. They were literally clinging to the overturned wreckage of their boat. And when they realized something was overhead, they did what human beings do when they believe they're about to be rescued. They waved. They signaled. They tried to survive. Think about how powerful that detail is. Waving, not shooting, not escaping, waving. The New York Times spoke to people who saw the footage, and the accounts are consistent. The survivors climbed onto the hull and gestured upward. Their intent, while not spoken, was painfully clear. They were requesting help or surrendering or simply begging not to die. And yet the second strike was carried out anyway. That's why this story has detonated the way it has. The administration keeps trying to frame this as a clean military operation in a drug war they treat as if it were a legally declared conflict. But no matter how hard they try to spin, the facts keep contradicting them. Was there a radio? No. Was there any communication equipment? According to those who saw the video, nothing. Just two men stranded on a sliver of hull, soaked, exhausted, terrified, and then gone. This is not a hypothetical, and it's not a gray area. This is the kind of act that entire war tribunals are built around. The classified briefing this week only made things worse. Lawmakers came out visibly disturbed. Some were blunt, saying the Pentagon's explanations were full of contradictions, that key claims offered by officials did not match what was shown on the video. One detail in particular is explosive. U.S. officials initially told reporters that one survivor had radioed for help, implying some kind of communication with hostile forces. But the admiral who oversaw the strikes later acknowledged that this was speculation, not fact. Speculation, in a briefing about an operation that resulted in the killing of human beings. That is not just sloppy, it's damning. At this point, you start to see why the Pentagon is fracturing internally, why reports are leaking, why lawmakers from both parties are pressing harder. Some members of Congress who viewed the video have said outright that there was no fog of war here, no confusion, no rapidly unfolding situation where mistakes felt inevitable. They described long, uninterrupted visual clarity. They described men who were not a threat. They described wreckage, not a vessel, and they described actions that do not match U.S. values or the laws of armed conflict. And yet, the Trump administration still refuses to release the video. You can feel the political playbook at work. We've seen it from Trump 1,000 times. Say you're open to transparency, promise the evidence is coming, insist there's no reason to hide anything, and then simply never release it. It's the same pattern we saw with his claims that he'd release the Epstein files, even though they were in his control the entire time. The same pattern when he said he'd happily talk to Mueller and then never did. He's mastered the art of the misleading headline. Trump says he's fine releasing the video. It sounds like openness, but it's empty, because at the end of the day, nothing gets released unless it benefits him. Here, the benefit is obvious. If the second strike video showed even a hint of justification, radio signals, hostile movement, a weapon, anything resembling a threat, it would already be blasted across every government social media account. They would have used it immediately to silence critics, but they haven't. And that silence speaks louder than any briefing or spokesperson ever could. And this brings me to something people sometimes forget. Secrecy isn't neutral. You don't hide harmless things. You hide dangerous things. You hide things that contradict your public story. You hide evidence that could legally implicate you. You hide what makes you vulnerable. So when the Trump administration claims this video is classified for national security reasons, I have to ask, whose security are they talking about? America's or their own? Meanwhile, the Pentagon is still launching strikes. over 20 of them, more than 80 people dead. We are now staring at a pattern of lethal military actions carried out under an administration that wants wartime powers without wartime accountability, wartime authority without wartime law, and wartime secrecy without wartime justification. That alone should stun the country. But when you combine that with the evidence emerging from this specific incident, the questions become overwhelming. What legal authority was used? Why wasn't Congress informed? Why was the second strike filmed but never released? Who signed off? What was the chain of command? Who wrote the after-action report? What discrepancies exist between the classified account and the raw footage? What was removed from the stateside summary? How many other incidents like this exist in classified archives? How many decisions were made based on speculation rather than evidence? These aren't partisan questions. These are constitutional questions, legal questions, human questions, and yet the administration treats them like inconveniences. I cannot stress this enough. We are talking about the deliberate killing of survivors who were defenseless and stranded. If the facts bear out, this isn't collateral damage. This isn't tragic but legal. This is something that would get U.S. service members court-martialed if they did it without authorization. The only reason this has dragged out is because the government is treating the top of the chain of command as untouchable. But let's be real. Donald Trump isn't going to fire Hegseth. Trump doesn't fire people for wrongdoing. He fires people for making him look bad. And at the moment, Trump's strategy is the same as always. Pretend the scandal isn't a scandal, dismiss the criticism as political, and hope the public moves on. But that won't work this time, because the evidence exists. The footage exists. The witnesses exist. The survivors' final moments exist on camera. And every day that passes without the video being released points directly back to the president's desk. And look, this secrecy problem isn't isolated. It's not a glitch. It's a pattern. You can trace it from Trump's involvement with Epstein's network, to Russia policy, to cryptocurrency deals with foreign actors, to the buried intelligence assessments about extremist threats, to classified materials stored in private homes, to actions taken in conflicts we're not even legally at war in. It's one long trail of cover-ups, evasions, locked doors, and no comment statements. People used to joke that Trump governed like a reality show producer, but reality show producers at least understand that the cameras eventually roll. Here, the administration is acting like they can simply edit out the parts they don't like, even when the edit involves people's lives. And the American public isn't buying it the way they used to. Not even people on the center right. Not even some conservatives who've supported Trump for years. There comes a moment when instinctively trusting the government feels foolish, especially when the government refuses to show you the evidence it claims exonerates them. One military lawyer put it bluntly, there is almost no legal argument that justifies the second strike unless you accept premises that aren't supported by law. Are we in a declared war with drug traffickers? No. Were the survivors on a functioning vessel? No. Were they posing a threat? No. Were the drugs themselves military targets? That's absurd. Each justification collapses under scrutiny. And when every legal leg collapses, the last thing standing is the reality no one wants to say out loud. This looks like an execution. That's why Congress is scrambling. That's why both Democrats and Republicans are pushing. Because if this is what it looks like, then the United States did something fundamentally incompatible with our values. Not the partisan values, the actual American values, the ones rooted in law, restraint, and the belief that we do not kill people who are trying to surrender. And as I walk through everything we've learned, everything still hidden, everything this administration is pretending doesn't exist, I keep coming back to the same question. What are they hiding? Because at this point, the only way this scandal ends cleanly is with transparency. Release the video, release the logs, release the communications, release the briefings, release the classified assessments, not the summaries, the full material. Let the country see for itself. And every day they don't do that is another day of silent confirmation that the truth looks worse than the cover story. This is where we are, at the crossroads of morality, legality, and raw political power. And what happens next will tell us more about this administration's willingness to bend the American military to its will than any speech, rally, or press conference ever could. Because if killing stranded survivors on camera isn't enough to force accountability, then what is?